So, labor mobility is, as we saw in the morning, and I don't need to comment much on that, we have huge tensions, huge problems in parts of Europe, a catastrophic situation on labor markets. At the same time, we have a limited number of countries that are performing well. At the same time also, labor mobility, so the regime and the legal basis of free movement had almost been completed. This only means that for Bulgaria and Romania are only transitional measures in effect in certain countries. But otherwise, for the 25 countries, there is free labor mobility within the EU. So under these conditions, we might ask, does it help? What do we expect of it? Does it help automatically? Does it lead to more efficient allocation of labor? So the solution is that the Spanish young unemployed are going to Germany, and half of Greece is going to Germany, or how does it look like, or probably would look like in practice? Of course, we cannot answer all these questions, but at least some lessons we can draw from post-enlargement labor mobility. We were conducting 2 projects on that at the ETUI. And what makes it also interesting that in the last period, between 2007 and 2011, the focus was on the crisis. So this was a kind of a laboratory test on their harsh conditions, how this labor mobility works in an environment that is changing so rapidly. Because, as we know, different countries, from the sending countries in Eastern Europe, but also receiving countries in Western Europe, were going through the crisis at different times and with different effects. So it was not homogeneous. One country was already deep in recession, the other one was still not. Labor markets effects were, on the one hand, still mild, in the other hand, deteriorating ground. So it was a very rapidly changing environment. And at the same time, we also had the effect of transitional measures that were still, kind of a factor that certain countries just opened up their labor markets in between. So it had been a really very testing environment. So what we did here is, first of all, monitor the main trends, particularly also with a view to how the migrant workers were affected during the crisis compared to nationals in different ways. And then one of the main focuses is the skills and occupation match. What do they do in those countries? And how does it compare to the nationals? So this is the main picture of EU8. So EU8 is, Central Eastern Europe and the Baltics. Those Central Eastern European countries that joined the Union in 2004. So Cyprus and Malta is not included in this. And what we see here as a broad picture, first of all, that the transitional measures had an incredibly big effect on the historical trends. This means after 2005, the UK, that didn't used to be a major destination, suddenly by 2007 it became the major one, as the UK, as a major country, opened up the labor market right away. Germany, on the other hand, the traditional destination country, didn't open up, and this is what we also see, that Germany, as receiving country, had always an influx of migrants, but rather moderate increase. Whereas in the UK it was a rapid increase with a slight downturn in 2009, but it continued to grow. What is also interesting here that the we also have a dynamic increase for Ireland, definitely, and very much. Whereas, and that is interesting, that for the EU8, Spain and Italy were not major destinations. On the other hand, for EU2, here, that is Bulgaria and Romania, the major destinations were Italy and Spain, with a clear effect of the crisis in Spain in 2010 and 2011, where the migration stock declined, but a continuing and rapid increase in Italy despite the crisis. And it also shows that for EU2, the other countries in Northern Europe were not major destinations. From point of view of receiving countries, it's definitely a major effect that the crisis in Spain and Ireland was very clear in the sense also of the capacity, absorption capacity of migrants. So the stocks clearly decreased, but probably, interestingly, not in any other country. So in all the other EU15 countries, despite the crisis, the number of EU10 migrants were growing. And this means also at the level of the aggregate figures. So the net influx to the EU15 was continuously growing also during the crisis. When looking at how migrants on the labor markets were affected, in terms of unemployment, employment, then shortly and briefly to put it, they were acting as a buffer. This means for the employment rates, in case if employment rates in receiving countries were decreasing, and this was the case during the crisis, so here we show the most intensive period of the crisis, 2008 second quarter, 2010 second quarter. Then we clearly see that in the majority of countries, the employment rate for nationals, this is the blue bars, was decreasing, but for the EU10 migrants, it was decreasing more, much more. So to say, overreacted, practically playing a buffer role. This is also true for the unemployment rates. I had a figure on that also somewhere. Maybe it's coming. It is also the same effect. That for the unemployment rate, the EU10 migrants had suffered higher increases than the nationals, and practically in all of the countries. So this gives an indication of a labor market buffer. This is also in accordance with the observation that the migrant workers were employed in more atypical jobs, in less secure employment contracts, and on top of that also in sectors that were very cyclical, and in that regard the building sector, the construction sector played the most important role, and this is how they were actually affected harder. The picture, however, to make it more complicated, is that since we had a continuous influx of migrants, from Central Eastern Europe to the EU15 also during the crisis. The absolute numbers were growing. Only their employment rates were shrinking. This means that on aggregate terms, the jobs that were, well, on absolute levels, the employment, and not the employment rate, but on absolute level, the employment of migrant labor decreased less than the nationals. And in certain countries, that also led to, tensions or political implications, especially in the UK, where the slogan was that migrants are taking the labor from the British people. But that simply shows the controversies. It's one important issue to talk about the skills and occupation mismatch. Because if we talk about efficient allocation of labor, it is simply important who is doing what and how the skills are utilized. And in that regard, we have a devastating picture. This means an underutilization of skills for the migrant labor that is very apparent in the numbers. For example, to say that for the UK and for Italy, we have numbers on that, exact numbers. And this is what Julia Bettin was doing. And she's not here, so I'm just showing some of these figures. So one was that, for example, in the UK, on average, 44% of nationals are employed in blue-collar jobs. Even less, 36% of EU15 migrants in the UK are employed in blue-collar jobs. But for EU8, it is 82%. And EU8, it is also close to 80. So it's already a huge gap. And what is even more disturbing, if we focus on tertiary educated migrants, and out of that, 2/3 was employed as blue-collar. In blue-collar jobs, actually both in the UK and Italy. Here there are some exact numbers on that. So for the UK, white collars, this is the classification that was available from the Labour Force Survey. So no more, but actually white collar and blue collar is kind of a proxy for that. And it is very clear that the gap between the EU8 and the national and the EU15 migrant work is simply huge in both cases, and actually before the crisis and during the crisis. This shows the tertiary educated, so maybe it's only the blue numbers that are really interesting. That means for tertiary educated migrants, over 60% in blue-collar jobs. So this is definitely a problem, a huge allocation problem. It can be a discussion what is behind that and why are EU 10 migrants different than EU 15 migrants in that respect. And if we look ahead to a potential north-south migration wave after and during the crisis, what do we expect? Do we expect a good match of skills, or would it be more that the Central Eastern European practices? One more, bottleneck or anomaly, and I only flag up this before we go further, because this will be an issue that is to take up by Jan Kramers and then later by Robert, that through the transitional measures and with the different channels of labor mobility at hand, we have huge distortions. So what this means here is self-employed. Self-employed without employees. And interestingly, let's say UK, for nationals, well, we heard that it is growing now, but it is still as a response to the crisis. So even for nationals it's growing, but it's still at moderate levels. So it's like 12% for UK nationals. For the EU8 migrants who have free access to the UK labor market, it is even lower. And for the EU2, for them, transitional measures apply, it's over 30%, it's like 33%. So it's a dramatically different picture. And this is clearly showing that there is a substitution. And this is the same for the Netherlands, actually even worse, and same for Belgium. And these are the countries that had the measures. So here there is definitely an issue. This is where I live, because the point is really that on basis of that picture, what lessons we can draw for policy, and also what do we expect of labor mobility as an adjustment tool. At least it seems to be very limited, the effect, and it is of course a question to what extent can we improve it. So thanks, I leave it now, and I pass the word to Martin.